Marcus Thompson adjusted his worn leather jacket as he approached the airline counter at Denver International Airport. At 68, the retired Army sergeant still carried himself with military bearing, though a slight limp from his left leg betrayed old wounds that never fully healed. The Purple Heart license plate on his truck back home in Nebraska wasn't for show. It represented 2 tours in Vietnam and shrapnel the doctors said would stay with him forever. Today's flight to Omaha was special. Marcus was heading to his grandson's high school graduation, the first in their family to earn academic honors. He'd booked his economy ticket months ago, carefully budgeting from his fixed veteran's pension. The narrow airplane aisles always aggravated his old injuries, so he routinely requested pre-boarding assistance, not for luxury, but necessity. At the gate, passengers were gathering for flight 447. The gate agent, a sharply dressed woman named Jennifer Walsh, appeared to be in her early 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an air of professional efficiency that bordered on coldness. She was processing passengers with mechanical precision, her interactions brief and businesslike. Marcus noticed Jennifer's demeanor seemed particularly dismissive when dealing with older passengers or anyone who appeared to need extra assistance. When an elderly woman ahead of him asked about wheelchair assistance, Jennifer's response was curt and impatient. "You should have arranged that when you booked," she snapped, barely looking up from her computer screen. As the pre-boarding announcement echoed through the gate area, Marcus approached the counter with his boarding pass and VA identification card in hand. He'd done this dozens of times before, a simple, routine request that typically took less than a minute to process. "Good afternoon," Marcus said politely, offering his warmest smile. "I'm Marcus Thompson. I'd like to request pre-boarding assistance, please. I have some service-related injuries that make navigating the aisle challenging." Jennifer glanced up from her screen, her eyes immediately scanning Marcus from head to toe with obvious skepticism. Unlike the elderly woman before him, Marcus didn't appear visibly disabled. His military posture and steady gait seemed to contradict his request in her mind. "Sir," Jennifer began, her tone already taking on a dismissive edge, "pre-boarding is reserved for passengers with visible mobility impairments or families with small children. You appear perfectly capable of walking normally." The first red flag waved in Marcus's mind. He'd encountered this attitude before, the assumption that all disabilities must be immediately apparent. But he remained patient, extending his VA card toward her. "I understand your policy, but I do have documented service-connected disabilities. The shrapnel in my leg makes standing and walking in confined spaces quite painful." Jennifer barely glanced at the official documentation, instead focusing on Marcus's seemingly able-bodied appearance. Her expression suggested she'd encountered what she believed to be countless people trying to game the system for early boarding privileges. "Documentation can be obtained by anyone," she said with a dismissive wave. "I need to see clear evidence of mobility limitation. Can you walk? Can you stand? Then you can board with your assigned zone." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced decades ago when fellow soldiers questioned his worthiness or commitment. But this was different. This was a civilian, in a position of minor authority, questioning not just his need, but implicitly his integrity. The first insult Jennifer's dismissive attitude hardened as Marcus attempted to explain his situation further. "Ma'am, I'm not asking for an upgrade or special treatment. I'm requesting assistance that your airline's own policy states is available for veterans with service-connected disabilities." Jennifer's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. "Service-connected disabilities. I see plenty of veterans come through here trying to use their status for perks. Half of them probably got their injuries in bar fights rather than combat." The casual cruelty of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd faced enemy fire, carried wounded comrades to safety, and lived with chronic pain for over 4 decades. To have his service and sacrifice reduced to a punchline by someone who'd never worn a uniform was almost incomprehensible. "Miss Walsh," Marcus said, reading her name tag while keeping his voice steady. "I earned my Purple Heart in the Mekong Delta in 1971. I'm not asking for anything I'm not entitled to under your airline's stated veteran accommodation policy." Jennifer's eyes narrowed as she noticed other passengers beginning to gather around the counter, some clearly listening to the exchange. Rather than backing down, she seemed to double down on her authority. "Oh, I'm sure you have all sorts of stories," she said, her voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "But I'm the gate agent here, and I make the determination about who qualifies for pre-boarding. My assessment is that you're physically capable of boarding with everyone else." Marcus felt the stares of other passengers, some sympathetic, others clearly entertained by the drama unfolding. An older couple behind him exchanged uncomfortable glances, while a business traveler nearby rolled his eyes impatiently at the delay. "I'm not telling stories," Marcus replied, his military discipline keeping his voice controlled despite the growing anger. "I'm stating facts about documented medical conditions that your airline's policy specifically addresses." Jennifer crossed her arms, her posture becoming more aggressive. "Sir, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I know the difference between someone who actually needs assistance and someone trying to work the system. You walked up here just fine and you're standing without any support, and frankly, you look like you could run a marathon if you wanted to." The humiliation was complete and public. Marcus stood there, a decorated combat veteran, being lectured about his own physical limitations by someone who'd never experienced anything more challenging than an overcrowded flight. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, "I'm not asking you to believe my stories. I'm asking you to follow your company's policy regarding veterans with documented disabilities." Jennifer's response was to turn away dismissively, beginning to call for the next passenger in line. "Next. I need to keep this boarding process moving." Marcus stepped back from the counter, his face burning with embarrassment and anger. The casual dismissal wasn't just personal. It felt like an insult to every veteran who'd ever been told their invisible wounds weren't real enough, weren't dramatic enough, weren't worthy of basic accommodation. He found a seat near the gate, his hip already beginning to throb from the extended standing. Around him, he could hear whispered conversations about the exchange, some passengers clearly uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed. The escalation as Marcus sat waiting for his boarding zone to be called, Jennifer's behavior toward other passengers seeking assistance became increasingly hostile. He watched as she denied a middle-aged woman with a walking cane early boarding, claiming the cane looked like a fashion accessory rather than a medical device. A young father traveling alone with twin toddlers was told that families with children under 5 qualified for pre-boarding, but his 3-year-olds looked mature enough to wait in line like everyone else. The man tried to explain that managing 2 active toddlers in a crowded boarding area was challenging, but Jennifer cut him off with the same dismissive attitude she'd shown Marcus. "Rules are rules," Jennifer announced loudly, clearly enjoying her authority. "If I make exceptions for everyone who thinks they deserve special treatment, we'd have chaos." Marcus noticed other airline employees at nearby gates watching Jennifer's behavior with obvious discomfort. A gate agent at the adjacent counter, an older man named Robert, kept glancing over with expressions of disapproval and concern. When boarding finally began for Marcus's zone, Jennifer made a point of calling out seat numbers with particular emphasis on his row. "Zone 4, rows 20 through 35. That includes you, sir," she said, looking directly at Marcus with a satisfied smirk. As Marcus stood to join the boarding line, his hip seized up momentarily from sitting in the uncomfortable airport chair. He caught himself with a slight stumble, and Jennifer's voice rang out across the gate area. "Careful there, soldier. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself walking to the plane." She called out with obvious sarcasm, causing several passengers to turn and stare. The public humiliation was complete. Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment as he slowly made his way to the back of the boarding line. His military training had taught him to endure hardship with dignity, But this felt different. This was deliberate cruelty from someone in a position of minor authority who seemed to take pleasure in his discomfort. A woman behind him in line, noticing his obvious pain, offered to let him go ahead of her. "No, thank you, ma'am," Marcus replied quietly. "I appreciate the kindness, but I don't want to cause any more trouble." As they slowly moved toward the jet bridge, Marcus overheard Jennifer speaking to a colleague about difficult passengers who think military service entitles them to special treatment. Her voice was intentionally loud enough for him to hear. "Some people just can't accept that their glory days are over," she continued. "They want to milk their service for every little perk they can get." Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. 4 decades of suppressed memories, of friends who never came home, of nights spent in VA hospitals, of learning to live with chronic pain, all reduced to someone's cynical assessment of his character. The boarding process became a painful ordeal. The narrow aisle of the aircraft, packed with passengers stowing luggage and finding seats, was exactly the situation Marcus had hoped to avoid by requesting pre-boarding. His hips screamed with each step, and he had to stop twice to let the pains subside. By the time he reached his middle seat in row 24, Marcus was exhausted and humiliated. The passenger in the aisle seat, a young businessman, made no effort to stand or move aside, forcing Marcus to awkwardly squeeze past while his hip protested every movement. The breaking point 20 minutes into the flight, Marcus's situation went from uncomfortable to unbearable. The passenger in front of him had reclined his seat fully, leaving Marcus virtually no legroom for his stiff hip. When he politely asked if the man could move his seat up slightly, he was met with a flat refusal. "I paid for the seat, and I'll use it however I want," the passenger replied without even turning around. Marcus tried to shift positions, but every movement sent sharp pains through his leg. The medication he took for pain management was in his carry-on bag, which was stored in an overhead bin several rows behind him due to the crowded boarding process Jennifer had forced him into. When the seatbelt sign was turned off, Marcus slowly stood to retrieve his medication. The movement down the narrow aisle was agony, and he had to stop twice to steady himself against seatbacks. Other passengers looked up with annoyance at the disturbance. As he returned to his seat with his medication, Marcus overheard the passenger behind him speaking to his companion. "Guy's obviously milking some kind of injury for attention. Probably one of those stolen valor cases you hear about." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Stolen valor. The accusation that he was faking his military service for benefits or sympathy. It was the ultimate insult to any veteran, suggesting that his Purple Heart, his service record, his very identity as a soldier was fraudulent. Marcus turned around slowly, his face pale with pain and anger. "Excuse me, sir. I couldn't help but overhear your comment. I assure you my service and my injuries are quite real." The passenger, a heavy-set man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit, looked up with a dismissive expression. "Yeah, well, that's what they all say. Convenient how all these heroes show up when they want special treatment." Marcus felt something snap inside him. This wasn't just about a seat or pre-boarding anymore. This was about dignity, respect, and the honor of every veteran who'd ever been questioned or dismissed. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable authority of command, "I earned my Purple Heart carrying wounded Marines out of a kill zone under enemy fire. I've lived with shrapnel in my leg for 50 years. I don't need to justify my service to you or anyone else." The passenger laughed mockingly. "Sure you did, Grandpa, and I'm sure you single-handedly won the war too." Marcus stood there for a moment, looking down at this man who'd never served, never sacrificed, never put his life on the line for others, and felt a profound sense of clarity. He wasn't going to let this stand. He wasn't going to let Jennifer's casual cruelty or this passenger's ignorant dismissal go unanswered. He carefully made his way back to his seat, pulled out his phone, and began composing an email. Not a complaint, a detailed report. He documented every interaction, every comment, every moment of disrespect. He included flight numbers, employee names, witness accounts from other passengers. But more importantly, he began reaching out to contacts he'd maintained over the years. Fellow veterans who'd gone on to careers in corporate America, in government, in positions where they could make things happen. Marcus Thompson wasn't just a retired surgeon with a painful hip. He was a decorated combat veteran with a network of friends and allies who understood the value of service and the importance of respect. The network mobilizes Marcus's first call was to his old platoon leader, Colonel James Mitchell, retired, who now worked as a senior executive at a major aerospace company. Jim had always maintained that the bonds forged in combat never broke, and he'd proven it numerous times over the years by helping fellow veterans navigate bureaucratic challenges. Marcus, good to hear from you. How are you holding up? Jim's voice was warm and familiar, immediately putting Marcus at ease. After Marcus explained the situation, Jim's tone hardened. That's completely unacceptable. What's the airline? When Marcus told him, Jim was quiet for a moment. Interesting. My company has a multi-million-dollar contract with them for executive travel. Let me make some calls. Marcus's second call was to his nephew, David Thompson, who worked as a journalist for a major newspaper. David had always been proud of his uncle's service and had written several articles about veteran issues over the years. Uncle Marcus, I'm so sorry this happened to you. This is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told. Would you be comfortable with me writing about this? Marcus agreed, but with conditions. I don't want this to be about me personally. I want it to be about how veterans are treated, about the assumptions people make about invisible disabilities. His third call was to Maria Santos, a former Army medic who now worked as a disability rights advocate. Maria had been instrumental in pushing for better airline accommodations for disabled veterans and had contacts throughout the industry. Marcus, this is a clear violation of multiple federal regulations, Maria explained. The Air Carrier Access Act requires airlines to provide accommodations for passengers with disabilities, including those that aren't immediately visible. Jennifer Walsh's behavior constitutes discrimination. Within hours, Marcus's network had sprung into action. Jim Mitchell had reached out to his contacts at the airline's corporate headquarters, making it clear that his company was reassessing their relationship with vendors who don't properly respect veterans. David Thompson had begun researching similar incidents and had contacted the airline's media relations department for comment. His preliminary inquiries had already reached senior management. Maria Santos had filed formal complaints with both the Department of Transportation and the airline's Customer Relations Department, citing specific violations of federal accessibility laws. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Captain Sarah Rodriguez, a Navy veteran who now worked as a pilot for the same airline, had been forwarded Marcus's original email through the company's internal veteran employee resource group. Sarah had experienced similar treatment early in her career and had since become an advocate for veteran employees and customers within the airline. She immediately began documenting the incident and reaching out to colleagues who had witnessed Jennifer Walsh's pattern of behavior. This isn't isolated, Sarah told Marcus during their phone conversation. We've had multiple complaints about this gate agent's treatment of veterans and disabled passengers. The company has been slow to act, but with the documentation you've provided and the attention this is getting, they won't be able to ignore it anymore. Marcus also discovered that Robert, the gate agent from the adjacent counter who had witnessed Jennifer's behavior, had filed his own internal report expressing concern about her treatment of passengers. Robert, himself a Vietnam veteran, had been uncomfortable with what he'd seen, but hadn't known how to address it until now. The investigation begins within 48 hours of Marcus's flight. The airline's corporate officers were dealing with a crisis that had escalated far beyond a simple customer service complaint. The combination of veteran advocacy groups, media attention, corporate pressure, and internal employee reports had created a perfect storm that demanded immediate action. Jennifer Walsh was called into a meeting with her supervisor, Regional Manager Patricia Hendricks, and a representative from Human Resources. The meeting began with what Jennifer assumed would be routine damage control, a slap on the wrist for being too rigid in applying policies. "Jennifer, we've received some serious complaints about your interaction with a passenger last week," Patricia began. "Can you walk us through what happened?" Jennifer's version of events painted her as a dedicated employee protecting the airline from passengers trying to abuse the system. The man looked perfectly healthy and was trying to use some old military card to get special treatment. "I followed policy by requiring visible proof of disability." The HR representative, Michael Foster, reviewed the documentation. "Jennifer, are you familiar with the Air Carrier Access Act and our company's accommodation policies for veterans with service-connected disabilities?" Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. "I know we have to accommodate people with real disabilities, but anyone can claim to be disabled. I have to use my judgment." "Your judgment," Patricia said carefully, "led you to deny accommodation to a decorated Purple Heart recipient with documented service-connected injuries. Are you familiar with what a Purple Heart represents?" Jennifer's face flushed. "I know it's some kind of military award, but people lie about that stuff all the time." Michael Foster exchanged glances with Patricia. Jennifer's response revealed a fundamental ignorance about military service and sacrifice that went beyond simple policy violations. "Jennifer, the Purple Heart is awarded to service members wounded or killed in combat. It's not some kind of military award. It represents bloodshed in service to our country. Mr. Thompson's VA documentation was legitimate and official." The meeting continued with a review of security footage from the gate area, which clearly showed Jennifer's dismissive behavior and public humiliation of Marcus. Multiple witnesses had also come forward, including passengers and other airline employees. But the most damaging evidence came from Jennifer's own colleagues. 3 other gate agents had filed reports detailing similar incidents where Jennifer had denied accommodations to passengers with disabilities, veterans, or elderly travelers. Her pattern of behavior suggested not isolated poor judgment, but systematic discrimination. Robert, the gate agent from the adjacent counter, provided the most compelling testimony. "I've watched Jennifer deny assistance to passengers who clearly needed help. She seems to take pleasure in exercising her authority to make people uncomfortable." The investigation also revealed that Jennifer had received multiple customer complaints over the past 2 years, but they had been handled individually rather than recognized as part of a pattern. The spotlight created by Marcus's case had finally revealed the scope of the problem. Corporate headquarters was facing pressure from multiple directions. Connell Mitchell's aerospace company had indeed placed their travel contract under review. David Thompson's newspaper article had been picked up by national media, with the headline "Purple Heart Veteran Humiliated by Airline Gate Agent." More importantly, the airline's own veteran employee resource group was demanding action. Captain Sarah Rodriguez had organized a letter signed by dozens of veteran employees expressing their concerns about the treatment of military customers and colleagues. The confrontation, the decisive moment, came during a formal disciplinary hearing attended by Patricia Hendricks, Michael Foster from HR, a representative from the airline's corporate legal department, and Jennifer Walsh with her union representative. Jennifer entered the room confident that her union representative would protect her job. She'd prepared a defense focusing on the difficulty of her position and the challenges of dealing with demanding passengers. "Before we begin," Patricia announced, "I want to make clear that this hearing is being recorded and that Mr. Thompson has been invited to participate via video conference." Jennifer's face went pale as Marcus Thompson appeared on the conference room screen. This wasn't going to be the routine disciplinary action she'd expected. Marcus spoke calmly and clearly, describing his experience without emotion or exaggeration. He focused on the specific policy violations and the pattern of behavior he'd witnessed, not on his personal feelings of humiliation. "I'm not seeking revenge or compensation," Marcus concluded. I'm seeking assurance that other veterans and disabled passengers won't face the same discrimination I experienced." When Jennifer was asked to respond, her prepared defense crumbled, faced with Marcus's dignified testimony and the overwhelming evidence of her misconduct. She fell back on excuses and blame-shifting. "I was just trying to prevent fraud," she said weakly. "You can't tell who's really disabled just by looking at them." Michael Foster leaned forward. "Jennifer, that's exactly the point. Many disabilities, including service-connected injuries, aren't immediately visible. That's why we have policies requiring accommodation based on proper documentation, not your personal assessment." The legal representative then outlined the serious exposure the airline faced. Ms. Walsh's actions constitute clear violations of federal disability accommodation laws. "We're fortunate that Mr. Thompson isn't pursuing legal action, but we cannot allow this pattern of behavior to continue." Jennifer's union representative tried to negotiate a lesser punishment, arguing that she needed additional training rather than termination. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the airline's exposure was too great. Captain Sarah Rodriguez, participating remotely, delivered the most powerful statement. "As a veteran and as a pilot for this airline, I can tell you that Jennifer's behavior doesn't just violate company policy. It violates the basic respect we owe to those who've served our country. Every veteran employee in this company is watching how you handle the situation." Patricia Hendricks delivered the verdict. "Jennifer, your employment with this airline is terminated, effective immediately. Your behavior has created legal liability, damaged our reputation, and violated the trust our customers place in us." Jennifer sat in stunned silence as the reality hit her. She'd thought her authority as a gate agent made her untouchable, that her union would protect her regardless of her actions. She'd never considered that her casual cruelty toward veterans and disabled passengers would have real consequences. As she was escorted from the building, Jennifer's parting words revealed the depth of her misunderstanding. "This is all because of one complaining veteran who couldn't handle being told no." Even in termination, she failed to grasp the fundamental issues of respect, dignity, and service that had led to her downfall. The legacy: 6 months after the incident, Marcus Thompson received an unexpected phone call from the airline's new Director of Veteran Affairs, a position created in direct response to his case. The airline had not only terminated Jennifer Walsh, but had implemented comprehensive changes to their customer service policies and training programs. All gate agents now received mandatory training on disability accommodation laws, with specific emphasis on invisible disabilities and service-connected injuries. The training included testimonials from veterans with various types of injuries and a detailed explanation of military awards and their significance. The airline had also partnered with major veteran organizations to create a formal accommodation process that removed subjective judgment from the equation. Veterans with documented service-connected disabilities could pre-register for accommodations, eliminating the potential for gate-level discrimination. Captain Sarah Rodriguez had been promoted to head the new Veteran Customer Experience Division, with a mandate to ensure that military customers received the respect and accommodation they deserved. Marcus had flown with the airline several times since the incident, and each experience had been respectful and accommodating. Gate agents went out of their way to ensure his comfort, and he'd been upgraded to first class on multiple occasions. Not as an apology, but as a genuine expression of gratitude for his service. The newspaper article written by his nephew David had sparked a national conversation about how veterans with invisible disabilities are treated. Other airlines had proactively reviewed their own policies, and several had reached out to veteran organizations to improve their accommodation processes. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome for Marcus was a letter he received from Robert, the gate agent who had witnessed Jennifer's behavior. Robert had been promoted to a training position where he helped implement the new veteran sensitivity programs. "Your courage in standing up to that treatment has made things better for countless veterans who will never have to experience what you went through," Robert wrote. Sometimes it takes one person willing to fight back to change an entire system. Marcus framed the letter and hung it in his home office, next to his Purple Heart citation and a photo of his old platoon. It served as a reminder that the battles worth fighting aren't always on foreign battlefields. Sometimes they're in airport terminals, corporate boardrooms, and anywhere dignity and respect are under attack. Jennifer Walsh, meanwhile, had found employment with a small regional airport, where her interactions with passengers were limited and closely supervised. The termination had followed her through multiple job applications, and she'd been forced to accept a significant reduction in pay and responsibility. In quiet moments, Marcus sometimes wondered if Jennifer had learned anything from the experience. He hoped she had, but he'd long ago learned that you can't control how others choose to grow or change. You can only control your own response to injustice. The incident had also strengthened Marcus's relationships with his fellow veterans. The network that had mobilized to support him had remained active, helping other veterans navigate similar challenges and advocating for better treatment across multiple industries. At his grandson's next graduation, from college this time, Marcus flew to the ceremony with complete confidence. The gate agent who processed his pre-boarding request thanked him for his service, ensured he was comfortable, and made the entire experience pleasant and dignified. As he settled into his seat for the flight home, Marcus reflected on the journey from humiliation to vindication. He hadn't sought to destroy Jennifer Walsh's career, but he had demanded accountability for behavior that was both discriminatory and insulting to veterans everywhere. The airline industry was slightly better because he'd refused to accept mistreatment quietly. Other veterans would face less discrimination because he'd been willing to fight back. And perhaps, most importantly, he demonstrated that dignity and respect aren't favors to be granted, they're rights to be defended. Marcus Thompson had served his country in combat and continued to serve it in peace, one battle for dignity at a time. Sometimes the most important victories happen not on distant battlefields, but in the everyday moments where we choose to stand up for what's right. The flight home was smooth, comfortable, and respectful. Exactly what every veteran deserved, and exactly what Marcus's stand had helped ensure for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.